The SD Ruby podcast is brought to you by New Relic.
My name is Mark Leglise. I'll be short on the formalities. I work for the Active Network up in Sorrento Valley doing Rails stuff. I've been doing Rails since 2006. Sometimes professionally, sometimes on the sidelines while I had to do Django for a couple of years. More video. I'm following up on last month's talk by Rafa about the Rails asset pipeline and specifically how you can execute page-specific JavaScript. Last month we talked about how to bundle all of your code into your big application.js but still be able to enforce that certain code only got executed on certain pages. But the problem, and I'm going to go over a quick summary of that again just for anyone who wasn't here, just to bring everyone back up to speed. The implementation is, I'd love to say we came up with it, but Paul Irish and I want to say Jason Garber came up with this method they call DOM-based routing. And I'll give you the basic setup. Your application layout, you set up just a couple HTML5 data attributes in the body tag where you just spit in the Rails controller and action. They don't get presented to the user, they're just there if and when the JavaScript decides to take advantage of them. We then set up a couple files. This one, Rails init, just sets up a construct globally, and specifically we're talking about Rails.controllers is sort of just an empty placeholder, and Rails.currentPage is a way to pull in right off the bat, okay, which controller and which action are we on? We haven't done anything with it yet, but we have it now, we know about it. So this will happen on every page. But then we want to set up per controller stuff. So for example, we have the user's controller where we'll assign an init function that's going to happen regardless of which action we're on, and something for the show. You can kind of put in whatever you want. But I want to point out a couple things that we're adding on from last month. We're specifically calling window.Rails controllers, and just as before where we're saying var Rails equals window.Rails. If you ever work with some kind of crazy JavaScript people, if you ever declare a global variable on accident, you'll get lynched. So you want to make sure var is in front of every variable declaration, or when you want it to be a global, you specifically say window dot. Here's my global. So we set up ahead of time. Rails is the global, and whatever we want specials underneath it is right there. So we now have the user's controller with an init and a show, and let's set up a comment that's going to happen site-wide, but here we have an encapsulated place to put our site-wide logic. And then here we're taking straight from the Paul Irish stuff, where we have a util thing, just it doesn't worth going through everything, but basically just says, all right, if we pass in a string for a controller and an action, it'll figure out what that is and execute it if possible. And if no action's provided, it'll just say, okay, well that means init. Everyone with me so far? I'm just going to kind of breeze through this part. So we have this set up, and then second part of this same file, we have an init function for util that we're going to call on DOM-ready, and we're going to say when the page is set, do comment init, do the controller init, and do the controller action, if you find it. So just by setting this up, we have the flexibility of if the functions happen to be there, do them. If not, don't sweat it, just keep going. So this is all kind of same thing as last month. This is review. This is what gets executed. Boom. It just does whatever's appropriate for the given page. No more extra logic involved. The big wins are that you can throw all your JavaScript together in application.js, the one big file, compress it, cache it, you're good to go. And it will only execute what you need to. So if you have your special checkout JavaScript, it's not going to try and execute on every page, but you can still lump it in with the big bundle to save on the speed. It's pretty awesome. The one problem is, what if application.js gets really big? Especially over time, larger applications, you add more and more code, more importantly, more and more libraries. For example, you want to add jQuery. Well, jQuery you can maybe put on every page, but what about high charts? You want to put high charts in, but you really only need that on 1 or 2 controllers, so you don't want to throw in an extra 100K compress onto every single page. Maybe if you're a desktop-only app, then that's fine, but what if you're trying to target mobile with the same page? Anyone know offhand how much does the iPhone cache? 25K is the maximum size file that an iPhone will cache in the browser. If your JavaScript file is greater than 25K in size, it'll download it, and then it'll download it again. And then again, and then again, and then again. And I don't need to tell you guys about trying to download a 300 or 400K JavaScript file over mobile on every page request. So there's a lot of considerations you have to make for mobile, and a lot of ways you need to start trying to dice your files up a bit nicer. And what I want to show is a more basic example of, let's say we've got high charts. And we want to put that on just our one controller. We don't need it anywhere else, but we do need to have it there. So I'm going to just start showing code. We've got our application.js. Let's see if we can bump up size here. This is almost exactly what you would see in default. The one major difference is this comes with a required tree by default. If any of you are familiar with that, it basically does a recursive inclusion where it'll just say, all right, put in jQuery, UJS, and then give me everything else in alphabetical order, which is great to start. But once you want to start slicing and dicing, you do need to get more explicit about what you want in here. So here I'll show you. We've got Rails init, common controller, and we'll do a products controller. And they are just as you saw, right? Rails init just has this code. I threw in a couple of logging statements. Common controller. I'm going to take a break briefly to talk about this other construct up here. But, you know, for the most part, it's the same thing as before. It's just we're spelling out now exactly which files we're including in the site-wide bundle. So then the question is, all right, but I've got my reports controller. In my reports controller, I need high charts, and I need my special code, and I need all these other things, and that needs to be separate. So what do? The normal application layout, we still have this data controller, data action up top. And at the bottom, we're going to do the JavaScript include tag for application. Nothing fancy. But then we're going to do this. We're going to have a yield for footer scripts, and we're going to have Rails start as its own separate thing at the end. If you remember from the slides, Rails start is the part that has this util exec and util init. Now it's actually very important that this comes after whatever extra footer scripts you want in the DOM, because even if you put it in that front file, and even if you say only do this on DOM ready, you will still run into the occasional case where it'll say, yes, I'm ready. Oh, but wait, I don't have that other thing that you wanted, and it just kind of barfs. So on the downside, you do have one extra file, this Rails init. It compresses down, the Rails start. It compresses down real small, and it is an extra asset call. But if we're talking about mobile, it's also super tiny, super cacheable. This file's never going to change. You can set a 5-year expire on this, and you're fine. So don't worry about it. It is an extra call, but it's a trade-off. The neat thing you get is this yield footer scripts. So when we're on, for example, the product page, and we do a load, I have no idea how to bump up this bottom section here. Can you guys read that? More or less? So I added these logging things so you can see we've got common init fires, the products init fires, products index fires, and we have everything set, right? And it came in with application.js, there's nothing to worry about, we're good. But now we go to the reports page, and we want to make sure that things are there. And just for the sake of the demo, I'm going to pull out the part that includes it. So we go here, we load it, and oh, we didn't find the reports. It says not found. But the important thing is execution continued. It didn't bomb out saying I can't find this thing. It just went, okay, well it's not there, don't worry about it, continue. But at the same time, we've got nothing on the page, so clearly something's not working. So we go back to the reports index, and we just do the simple content for. If all of you are familiar with specific yield blocks that are beyond just the standard one, it allows you to define that this top portion, the chart container, that's going to come in your basic yield block. This bottom part is going to come in the yield for the footer scripts. So you ensure that this extra include tag is not going to show up somewhere else in the page. It'll be right there in between your application.js and your Rails start. So we put in this bundle reports. What's this bundle reports? I don't know what that is. Bundle reports is the same thing as application.js. It's a manifest. It follows the exact same syntax as any other asset pipeline example. We're just requiring a couple files. All the same features are available. You can require trees, you can require libraries, you can require from app or lib or vendor, it doesn't matter. It's just another manifest. So we require it, and here we say, oh, but I want high charts. That's our biggie. Give me high charts. Also, give me my controller. And we can look at report controller. It's the same kind of thing. We set it up the same way, but oh man, this index function, this is pretty gnarly. I definitely don't want that in my whole site-wide code. That's going to be a lot to download. So we put it in here. Then when we load the page, hey, look at that. It found it on the bottom, and we drew a graph, everything executed, we don't need to worry about it anymore. And it's separate. The key thing here is, where previously the issue for how do I do page-specific JavaScript was, well, just don't load that file except for on that page, and then you have page-specific JavaScript. But then everyone went, yeah, but that could be kind of inefficient. What if my page-specific is like 5 lines? Hence why we came up with the DOM ready, where you can put it all together. This is a way of saying, okay, but I want both of those benefits decoupled. So you can say, I want to be able to execute my page specific in this very consistent way so that it doesn't matter where I put my files, but I do still want the ability to slice and dice them. This way kind of sets it up for you. Now, the only key thing is when you go to compress. Because if the way I've set it all up so far, you run this in development, it'll work, you'll have no problems, you won't have to worry about anything. The one big trick is when you want to run rake assets precompile. By default, that just looks at application.js and application.css, and that's it. But if any of you have seen the asset pipeline for Dummies post that went up fairly recently, which actually, if you haven't seen, does a great job of kind of outlining all the basics, there's only one piece you have to add. If you look at your config application.rb, there's kind of a bunch of your standard stuff. And at the bottom here, you can add things to put into the asset precompile list, which is just this magic list that has some defaults that are just baked really deep into the Rails code, and you just say, add on my extra 2. And it will handle the difference between bundle reports, which is a manifest, and Rails start, which is not. It's just straight JavaScript. But it won't matter. It'll take both of them, compile them individually, minify, put them on your CDN, whatever kind of magic you have going on for precompiled assets, it'll handle it. And then in production, it just loads it up, it has a little cache busting hash on the end, and you're good. Any questions? So a couple things I wanted to point out that I threw in additionally for people who are more Ruby or Rails centric and a little bit less JavaScript. Right here, common controller, for example. 2 big things in here that if you work with some hardcore JavaScript guys, they're going to smack you around until you do these. One is this use strict. Use strict is a declaration for what's called Ecma Script 5. The short version is, it's the new JavaScript. It's the same JavaScript, but there's a couple new things added on, like the .each iterator is built into the browser, things like that. UseScript is a declaration that will be ignored silently by all the other old browsers, because it's just a string, who cares? But newer browsers will say, oh, UseScript, I know what that is. And they'll warn you about things like accidentally declaring global variables. And it'll trigger a bunch of in-browser optimizations saying, oh, your code knows that you're going to do this fancy new stuff. Okay, we'll do it, no problem. And it speeds up a lot of things. The other important piece, if you haven't seen it before, is this way of wrapping your code in a function declaration and right here, execution of that function. This right here is a way to make sure that whatever you write is not going to pollute the global namespace. Which in Ruby, global namespace, it's kind of already set up for us. You don't really have to worry about accidentally putting things in here. But in JavaScript, if I just do test var equals b, that's a global variable right away. Unless you do this. And there's a lot of really experienced developers who don't know that, or even if they do know that, miss it very frequently. I caught it yesterday. Use strict will make the console in the browser warn you, hey, whoa, 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 you assigned a global. Stop. Look at this. It has a lot of extra niceties to it, but that's sort of the basics of it. Yeah, we covered it all. Any questions? Yes?
Do you have your sample checked in someplace that we can, yeah?
I will check it in tonight. Yeah, I'll put it on GitHub. If you guys get... my name on there is mleglise. I'm going to check it in as a, let's see what I called it, Rails DOM routing example. It's extremely bare bones. It's a vanilla Rails with Twitter Bootstrap thrown in, and then just this. All right, thanks.